Hello, I'm Doug Benedict, and welcome to the Butler Esports interview series, where we're interviewing sports leaders, owners, and industry experts on the ever-evolving world of esports. Brandon Gaudin is our interview this weekend. Brandon has had an illustrious career in broadcasting, spanning the collegiate and professional ranks. Brandon's work includes his expanding tenure as the play-by-play voice of Madden NFL for EA Sports. Brandon is also a Butler alum. In a normal year, Brandon would have just wrapped up commentating for the NCAA tournament, but as we all know, COVID-19 has canceled all in-person sporting events. So like many others, Brandon has had to adapt, which brings us to your most recent work, your One Shining Moment iteration from your own household. Can you tell us where that idea came from? What's the response been, and why are the Butler Bulldogs not the national champs?
I've gotten that question a lot, Doug. Appreciate you having me. Well, like so many, as you alluded to, I have a lot of time on my hands. And for many industries, people can work from home and continue their jobs in some limited capacity. But for those of us like me that actually go and cover live sporting events, there are no sports to cover. And so work has completely grinded to a halt. And I've been getting outside. I live in Atlanta and the weather's been great. So every day I've been taking a jog or a walk. And on one of those jogs a couple of weeks ago, I thought, the NCAA tournament would have normally been coming to a close. I have this Nerf hoop in my house. What if I tried to recreate one shining moment and do some small version of it, just filming it on my iPhone? And from there, that small idea sort of avalanched. And by that night, I had taped all the markings on my floor. I had ordered all of these T-shirts of these various teams on Amazon. I had ordered a couple of mascot cheerleader outfits. And so it turned into a much bigger production than I anticipated, but it was a very fun 5 to 6 days filming that and putting it together. And it certainly got a larger response than I expected. I anticipated just sending that to friends and family. I didn't expect it to get over 100,000 hits on YouTube, but it was neat to see people say that it was sort of a little break from everything that's going on right now, and a humorous, fun thing to look at. So I was glad that it could bring somewhat of a reprieve to people.
It's a good payoff for 5 to 6 days of work on that. That's very good. But getting right into it, can you kind of describe your journey into broadcasting, what it's been like and where you started, I guess?
Sure. Actually, there's a tie into the video that I created. I mean, when I grew up in southern Indiana in Evansville, and there was a little basketball goal in my parents' bedroom that I would play on as a kid, and I would find myself playing as both teams and announcing the game as I went along. So from that little basketball goal, when baseball season came, I was playing baseball in my foyer with a little balloon and a bat. And I just found myself always announcing sports as a kid and watching the Atlanta Braves on TBS and listening to the announcers. And so when I got to high school, I called a couple games for my local high school. And then it came time to go to college. And I thought, well, I liked Butler. Butler was a good size. They had a good communications and broadcast program. And I thought, I'm going to try this in college and see what happens. And I still enjoyed it there. And when I graduated, I got into minor league baseball. And just from there, I've stayed in the industry, and one job has led to another. And it's a profession that I feel fortunate to have now loved for over 3 decades, and a profession that I will stay in until somebody tells me to stop doing it, because it's such a fun, enjoyable thing.
Yeah. So, you've been doing it for a while now, and you've been all over the place. Do you have, two of your most memorable moments since you've been broadcasting, things that really get you excited when you think back to them?
It's hard to pick out. I'm 35 now. When I graduated Butler at 22, so I guess I've been doing this for 13 years. I said minor league baseball, so when I did that, I was the voice of a team. And when I worked at Butler as the voice of Butler, you're the voice of a team. I did the same thing at Georgia Tech. Those are different jobs than what I do now, where I'm a network broadcaster, where you are a neutral participant. You're not supposed to cheer for one of the teams that is playing. But I will, to your question, pick out a couple of moments from my time at Butler. I was not there for the first Final Four run where they lost to Duke in Indianapolis. That was the year before I got the job. So in 2011, when I got the Butler play-by-play job, the running joke was, "Oh, too bad, Brandon, you missed it by 1 year, but it's still a great job, and congratulations." And so we get into the NCAA tournament, but that year we were an 8 seed and we're not expected to do a whole lot. but lo and behold, of course, ran through all the way to the national championship game yet again. So I would say my first greatest memory is just that tournament run in totality in 2011. But really, when Butler beat Florida in New Orleans in the Elite Eight to clinch the Final Four appearance, they're being on the inside of that, being with the team in the locker room after, being with the team on the bus and the flight home and getting back to Hinkle and seeing all the fans. There was something special about that that is simply irreplaceable. That's probably the greatest memory that I have in not only just forget about broadcasting at Butler, just in my sports career of being a part of a team that clinched a spot in the Final Four. And the second memory I would say would be a couple of years later when game day for ESPN came to Hinkle Fieldhouse and Butler played Gonzaga. Butler was ranked, I think, 13th. Gonzaga was 8th, and Roosevelt Jones stole the inbounds pass and hit the game-winning shot with no time left. And that's the loudest. I've heard Hinkle Fieldhouse loud many times, but that is certainly the loudest I have ever heard Hinkle Fieldhouse, and one of the coolest moments in Butler basketball history that I'll always remember.
Absolutely. It's great to hear that Butler holds those places in your heart.
Yeah, no doubt.
So plenty of sports work. What do you do outside of it? Do you broadcast other things, or you lend your voice to other things?
Yeah, I mean, the biggest thing that I do when I'm not broadcasting live sporting events is you referenced in the intro, the play-by-play for the Madden NFL video game. That's based down in Orlando, and as I said, I live in Atlanta, so I make about, depending on the year, this year obviously it's different, but in a typical year, I'd make about 25 to 30 trips down to Orlando and record about 60 to 70 days out of the year in that studio, cutting lines for the video game. This is my 5th season doing it. The analyst on the game is an awesome guy, good friend of mine, Charles Davis, who's an NFL commentator. And the two of us it's just like it's set up like a recording studio would be. You would imagine a singer behind the glass with a producer and a director and a writer on the other side of the glass, and they give us scripts and lines to commentate, and it's a lot of fun. It is a job that I never envisioned having, a job that is very, very rewarding because it's a video game that I grew up playing. I look forward to playing it every year when it came out. So to be a small part of that Madden franchise and get to sit in a chair where guys like Jim Nantz and Chris Collinsworth and Al Michaels and Gus Johnson sat before me, it's a lot of pinch me moments for me. I still feel like I'm extremely lucky, extremely fortunate to be able to do that.
How long are those recording sessions usually? How long do they keep you in there?
Yeah, so typically we'll get in and start on, so if a week for the NFL season, if a game happens on Sunday that I would broadcast, on Monday morning I fly down to Orlando, get into the studio, we would start around 10 a.m. and go until about 3:30 or 4 p.m. with a little lunch break. The EA studio can only handle so much audio because you think about once we record it, the engineer has to edit it. It actually has to go overseas to China to be implemented and put into the game and then sent back for testing to make sure that all the lines are correctly in the game, that we didn't screw anything up, and that the lines are playing at the right time when the player controls what's going on in the action. So because of that, our recording sessions can't really last more than 5 hours per day. That's about the maximum amount that they can handle. So typically during the NFL season, I'm down there Monday and Tuesday, and we'll record about 10 hours in a given week.
Interesting, very interesting. So when you're back to your, broadcasting in general, how do you prepare for that? Do you put yourself in a certain mentality? You meditating? What are you doing to make sure that you're on your A game?
Yeah, there's a couple of different answers to that based on what I'm doing. So for the video game recording, what's strange is that you're in that studio and you're supposed to be broadcasting a game that's really a fake game. So that's kind of acting. I view it much differently as what I do when I actually go to a real game where you have 80,000 people in a stadium and you're just describing what's going on. That's not as much acting as just reacting to what is happening. But when you're doing the Madden video game and they're handing you a script and it's 10 o'clock on a Monday in April and you're supposed to be announcing the Super Bowl and plays that are happening in that Super Bowl, you really sort of have to trick your mind into being in that moment and act like you're at the stadium broadcasting those big-time plays in a big-time atmosphere when in reality you're just in a quiet studio down in Orlando, Florida. So psyching yourself up for that is different. When you go to an actual game, if I'm broadcasting a college or an NFL game, you have those 70, 80,000 fans to kind of pick you up and give you that energy and momentum. And you are simply looking down and describing what action is taking place on the field. Now, a lot of people wonder what goes into preparing for an actual broadcast. And that's where what you're seeing, I'm sitting at my home office. So during the week when I'm home and I'm not in Orlando, I'm preparing for whatever game I have upcoming. But this is my office. So it's a lot of research, a lot of taking articles and notes and things about these teams that we're covering and paring it down into whatever information I think the viewer at home would want to know about. Stories about players, storylines about teams, how their season's going. And essentially, it's like an open book test when you broadcast that game. You take all of the information you compiled during the week, you put it on these cheat sheets in front of you, and then you have those in front of you while you're broadcasting the game. So 9 times out of 10, when you hear announcers talk about this stat or this player belonging to this franchise and the storyline, some of it's from memory, but a lot of it they're peeking down at their cheat sheets and just incorporating and weaving in those nuggets as they see fit so that you, the viewer at home, have a little bit more context and information.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. I was, very knowledgeable when you're speaking up there. So obviously you gotta do a lot of your own research, gotta look into a lot of things. But so as we talked earlier, everyone's on a different schedule now because of everything going on. What's your job look like now? How other than making One Shining Moment videos?
Yeah, it's personal development really is a lot of it. So I'm going back over some of my broadcasts from last year. I picked a couple of games that I did in football and basketball, looking at those, trying to critique where can I get better. We've had some Zoom calls with producers and directors and other voices in the industry to look at each other's work, just to try to stay sharp. Just we're asking the same question that everybody else is. How can we have improvement during this time? So that's been one thing. The EA Sports element is actually getting ready to pick back up because they have sent us equipment to try to record in our house. As I mentioned, we normally always do that in Orlando to have this controlled environment so that all of the audio clips in the game sound the same. But since this is such a unique time, they have sent us equipment and they're going to have an engineer set it up, and they want to experiment with us recording from our homes and seeing what those sound clips sound like in the game. So that is going to start taking up some time here beginning next week and going forward. We really hope it works so that we can have updated commentary because so many people are at home playing the game right now. So it would be nice to provide them with some new context with the draft coming up. Getting some of the rookies into the game and just getting some fresh commentary so that they're not always hearing the same line. So knock on wood, that experiment will work and will also keep me busy for as long as this COVID-19 has us quarantined.
Well, yeah, no one knows how long right now. I'm gonna make no prediction. But what's really interesting about it is, as someone who's been working in, this traditional broadcasting and now virtual broadcasting as well, what does the evolution of all of this look like, esports, and what, the competitions that are now taking place and the crowds that are coming around them and the broadcasters themselves? To you, what does it look like?
Well, it's incredible to see the growth of it over the last 5 years. Every year it seems to grow exponentially. EA Sports puts on all of these esports competitions where people can win literally over $1 million just for playing Madden or FIFA or some other video game and being good at it and beating others. And I think where you're really seeing the grassroots rise is what you're talking about right now, and that logo that's so awesome behind you is these colleges and universities that have now formed these esports programs because there's such a demand for it. If you told me 10 years ago that a school like Butler would have a burgeoning esports program and that kids would be interested and involved in it, and all of these conferences would have affiliations in the esports world, it wouldn't have resonated because it just wasn't on the radar. But now that these big video game companies and even broadcast companies like the NFL Network and ESPN have bought into airing these competitions, we have seen the growth in the college level, and not only that, but in the high school level. And that has been something that is very neat to see. Because look, there's an element to there's some validity to saying, oh, if you play video games, worth nothing and you're just sitting in your mom's basement. You need to be doing something more useful with your time. And look, I'm a big proponent of people, especially children, not just playing video games and getting out, but I think there's a proper place for video games, and it is fun to compete, and there is a real skill to it. And so I think the use of it at the university level and beyond is something that is worthwhile, and we're seeing everybody gravitate to it.
Yeah, absolutely. And so with that and all this new technology, how is broadcasting embraced this, not necessarily esports, but the technology as you've seen it evolve, whether it be new mics or, playbacks or, if that makes sense.
Yeah, well, it just all goes hand in hand. I mean, with it evolving and changing and growing so much, you're seeing the equipment technology change because it's being demanded. You're seeing so many schools that are using these esports platforms make sure that they have the infrastructure to handle it, not only quality microphones and gaming systems, but that they have the Wi-Fi speeds, the broadband speeds that have the capability so that they can connect with other schools and have these gaming competitions. So I think, again, if it wasn't, some people might think, oh, this is being forced and there's not a demand for it. No. This is just a reaction to the demand. So because so many people are into esports and gaming, because ESPN is airing these competitions and getting really good ratings from them, that's why we're seeing these colleges react, these universities react and spend the money, because there's a demand, and kids are now interested in being a part of this, not only for the prize money, which could be there if they become good enough, but also just for the competition and the community and camaraderie of it.
Yeah. So that almost answers my next question about esports kind of seizing the moment right now, as we've seen stuff being broadcasted, prime time, from the esports arena. Do you think this is going to be just a temporary thing until we get out of this, or are they really carving out their own, space? And what do you think the challenges for esports might be in carving out that space?
I think they have carved out their own space. I think they're one industry that maybe has benefited a little bit, where so many have suffered during this COVID-19 crisis. And you hate to think that some people benefit, but at least some people are benefiting, right? It's better than everybody suffering. I think, again, more people are playing video games now. More people are watching these esports events online and on their television because people love sports, right? And while this may be make-believe sports, it's not an actual sporting event where you watch Cam Newton on the field. It is an element of competition in sport that still exists, and it's something, it proves how much we crave that release from our everyday life to be able to participate in sport no matter what the medium is. So I think that esports has actually benefited from this time. I think that it is, like we talked about, it's continuing to garner more and more demand and attention, so I think it will continue to grow. When you talk about the challenges that esports faces, I think it will be what is the cap? How much can it grow before you've oversaturated the market? So far, it hasn't apparently hit that, because the numbers are continuing to grow and grow and grow, and the interest grows. But eventually, I think there will be a cap to it, but I think it's going to be larger than anybody initially anticipated. I think there's still a lot of room for growth in it. And I don't really view real sports as a competition to esports. I kind of view that they can grow simultaneously. And you may say, well, how can sports grow more? Fair point. I mean, the NFL and college football, they're at an all-time high, and I think they're just going to stay there. But with their popularity, I think that fuels more and more people just to play their own make-believe version in these video games because they love their sports so much. So, okay, let's have an esports version. Or even the non-sports video games. I don't see those diminishing or really having any competition. I see it just kind of continuing to foster growth as we move forward.
Very interesting. That's a great take, which again perfectly segues into the next question of, I'd like to know, do you think there's a huge difference between, esports casting and sports casting and broadcasting? And do you think they're the same in any way?
Do you mean from an announcer standpoint for the people that are talking about it?
Yeah, the people who are describing, who are in your chair, essentially.
Yeah, I think there's a different preparation to it. When you're doing I have not done an esports announcing event where I have actually been on the microphone, but I've talked to a lot of people that have, and I know the guys who do that for EA Sports. And it is different because you're talking kind of more about the actual players that are controlling it, and you're having fun, right? It's more. It's not as serious of a broadcast as when you're sitting in the booth calling an NFL game on television, where you need to be really buttoned up. I think what's neat about the esports is that you can let your hair down a little bit if you're announcing those games, because the people know it's make-believe, so you can kind of rib a little bit more. You can make fun of decisions that the players make, and you can kind of ham it up a little bit, if you will, more so than you would during a regular NFL game. So I think that's what's neat, though. I think that makes it fun, and it makes the players who are playing the game also relatable if they're being ribbed and stories are being told about them as they play and have success or failures. I think it's really kind of a neat thing that these broadcasters have found the way to make this fun for the viewers at home.
Yeah. You have demonstrated a rich knowledge of the field and of everything related to it. So with all of your experience and your journey that you have described to us, if someone is sitting watching this and they want to do what you do, what advice are you going to give them? What career advice would you say, to a new broadcaster, I suppose?
Yeah, well, I would say a couple of things. One, it's an incredible amount of fun, and I would not change what I do for the world. I really feel that way, and I feel lucky. I realize there are so many people who sit at jobs at 9 to 5 that don't enjoy them. And so while, yes, it is a lot of work and preparation and travel, all in all, the pros outweigh the cons, and I feel very lucky to be able to do this line of work. If you're trying to get into the field, it is a little bit of a time commitment to try to take step 1, step 2, step 3. I mean, my first job at 22, as I referenced way back at the beginning of the interview, I was only making $500 a month broadcasting minor league baseball and living in the basement of a house in Utah for $100 a month rent, sharing a bedroom with somebody. My point being, it does take a little bit more time in this industry than most other industries to make it lucrative enough to where you are truly sustainable on your own. So it is a little bit of a journey, but I think that's what separates those that really are passionate about it versus those that ultimately say, yeah, you know what, that was fun, but I'm going to go into something else. And so I was just ultimately passionate about it and was determined to stick with it until it worked out, and thankfully it's worked out. But my point being, if you're going to get into it, you really, really need to like it, and you need to like it to the point where you're okay in those first few years doing jobs that are not very desirable, just to try to get to a platform that is more enjoyable and ultimately more fulfilling. And then the other thing I would say is, and not to scare anybody away, but it is a lot of travel, and you don't get much time at home. So, I'm not married yet. I don't have a family, and you can make jokes about why that is. The One Shining Moment video is probably one of those reasons. But I'm gone from this apartment probably 250 nights a year out of the 365. So just realize that there are sacrifices. You miss a lot of weddings. You miss a lot of family vacations. A lot of holidays. Unfortunately, you're at the event that everybody is at home watching. So there are some drawbacks that you just have to be aware of.
Yeah. Wow. That sounds like great advice. That's what I'll say. So our final question for you, and is kind of going to be our tradition on our little interview show here, is we'd like to ask you, who are 2 other sports leaders, owners, industry experts that you think that would be beneficial to interview?
Well, these are going to be some tough ones to get a hold of right now, but I'll just give you my 2 biggest mentors in the industry. I would say Al Michaels and Jim Nantz. Al Michaels, who does Sunday Night Football on NBC, and then, of course, Jim Nantz, who does everything for CBS. I just think they're in their positions for a reason. And yes, they're a little bit older, but they've been in those positions for a while because they're so good at their craft. And if you watch their broadcasts, there are very few, if any, mistakes, and they have a way of weaving in stories and just making the listener feel like they're sitting on the couch next to them, and nothing is ever forced. And I think that that's a real testament to how good those guys are and how long they've been at the highest level. So they would be fascinating interviews. They're tough, of course, to get a hold of because so many people want to talk to them. But Al Michaels and Jim Nantz would be at the top of my list.
Absolutely. We're going to get very good at getting interviews. Trust me. That's where our energy is going. But that's everything we got for you. Thank you for your time. Thank you for entertaining us with your inspiring One Shining Moment video. And, stay safe, stay well, go dogs, all that stuff.
Thanks for having me, Doug. Absolutely. Go Dogs.